The woman kneeling at the grave looked like a ghost herself, pale and thin in the fading light of a Texas evening. And Franklin Garrett felt his heart seize with something between anger and grief when he saw her tending his wife's resting place as if she had every right to be there. He had ridden out to the small cemetery on the edge of his property, just as he did every Sunday, a ritual he had maintained for the 3 years since consumption had taken Margaret from him. The graveyard sat beneath a cluster of cottonwood trees, offering shade and peace to the dozen or so markers that dotted the hillside. Most of them belonged to ranchers and their families, people who had tried to make a life in this harsh stretch of Texas near Springerville in the year 1883. Franklin dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the dusty ground with a soft thud. His bay mare nickered quietly, sensing his tension. The woman at Margaret's grave did not turn around, though he knew she must have heard him. She continued her work, pulling weeds from around the white cross he had carved himself, arranging wildflowers in a small glass jar. "What do you think you are doing?" His voice came out rougher than he intended, gravelly from disuse. He spoke to his ranch hands and his livestock, but rarely engaged in real conversation anymore. The woman startled, her hands freezing mid-motion. She turned slowly, and Franklin found himself looking at a face that seemed carved from exhaustion and determination. She could not have been more than 23 or 24, with dark auburn hair pulled back in a simple braid and eyes the color of storm clouds. Her dress was faded calico, patched in several places, and her boots were nearly worn through. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "I did not mean to intrude. I can leave." "That does not answer my question." Franklin crossed his arms, feeling the familiar weight of his Colt against his hip. He was not a violent man by nature, but 3 years of loneliness had made him harder, more suspicious. "Why are you here?" "Did you know my wife?" The woman shook her head, color rising in her pale cheeks. "No, sir, I never had the privilege." "Then why?" He gestured at the grave, at the carefully tended earth and the fresh flowers. "Why would you care for the resting place of a stranger?" She stood up slowly, brushing dirt from her skirt. She was shorter than Margaret had been, more delicate in build, but there was steel in her spine. "I have been traveling for weeks, sir. When I arrived in Springerville 2 months ago, I had nowhere to go, no family, no prospects. I found work at the boarding house doing laundry and mending, but it barely pays enough for a room and 1 meal a day." Franklin waited, his jaw tight. He did not see what this had to do with Margaret's grave. The woman continued, meeting his eyes with an honesty that surprised him. "I walk out here most evenings when my work is done. It is peaceful, away from the noise of town. One day I noticed this grave, how the flowers had died and the weeds had taken over. The stone said she was only 26 when she passed. I thought about how sad that was, how young. I thought about how I might end up in an unmarked grave someday, with no one to remember me or tend my resting place. So I started bringing flowers, pulling weeds. I suppose I was tending the grave I hope someone might tend for me someday." The anger drained out of Franklin like water from a broken barrel. He stared at this strange woman who had been caring for his wife's grave, this woman who had nothing but gave her time and effort to honor a person she had never met. It made no sense. In his experience, people only did things when there was something to gain. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Naomi Harper," she replied. "And you must be Franklin Garrett. The boarding house owner mentioned you when I asked about the graves out here. She said you lost your wife to consumption 3 years back, that you run the largest cattle ranch in this part of Texas." Franklin nodded slowly. "That is correct." He moved closer to the grave, looking down at the flowers she had arranged. They were just wildflowers, nothing fancy, but they had been placed with care. The grave looked better than it had in months. His visits had become perfunctory, standing in silence for a few minutes before riding away. When had he stopped tending it himself? "I apologize for disturbing you," Naomi said, stepping back. "I will not return. This is your private grief, and I had no right." "Wait." The word came out before Franklin could stop it. Naomi paused, looking at him with those gray eyes that seemed to see too much. "I am not angry. I was surprised, that is all. You do not need to stop coming here." "Are you certain?" He was not certain of anything anymore, but he nodded. Margaret would have appreciated the kindness. She was good at seeing the humanity in people, better than I ever was. Naomi smiled, just a small upturn of her lips, but it transformed her face. "Thank you, Mr. Garrett. That means more than you know." They stood there in the growing darkness, two lonely souls beside a grave, and Franklin felt something shift inside him. It was not healing, not yet, but perhaps it was the first crack in the wall he had built around his heart. "It is getting dark," he said finally. "Springerville is 3 miles from here. You should not walk back alone. I have made the walk many times. That does not make it safe." He gestured to his horse. "I will give you a ride back to town." Naomi hesitated, clearly weighing propriety against practicality. Practicality won. "Thank you. That is very kind." Franklin helped her up onto the mare, then swung up behind her. It had been 3 years since he had been this close to a woman, and he found himself acutely aware of her presence, the faint scent of lavender soap, the way she held herself carefully to avoid too much contact. He urged the horse forward, and they rode in silence down the dusty road toward Springerville. The town was small, just a main street with a general store, a saloon, a boarding house, and a church. A few other buildings clustered around it, including a blacksmith and a doctor's office. Oil lamps were being lit in windows as families settled in for the evening. Franklin had not spent much time in town lately, preferring the isolation of his ranch. He stopped in front of the boarding house, a 2-story building with peeling paint and a sagging porch. Naomi dismounted with practiced ease, then turned to look up at him. "Thank you again, Mr. Garrett, for understanding and for the ride." "Franklin," he heard himself say. "You can call me Franklin," she smiled again. "Then you must call me Naomi." He touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement, then turned his horse back toward his ranch. As he rode through the darkness, he found himself thinking about Naomi Harper, about her kindness to a stranger's grave, about the loneliness he had recognized in her eyes because it matched his own. The next Sunday, Franklin rode out to the cemetery and found Naomi already there. She looked up when he arrived, surprise and something else flickering across her face. "I hope I am not in your way," she said. "No." He dismounted and stood beside her. "I thought maybe we could tend the grave together." They worked in companionable silence, Naomi pulling weeds while Franklin trimmed back the overgrown grass with a small scythe he had brought. The physical labor felt good, purposeful. When they were done, the grave looked cared for in a way it had not in too long. "Tell me about her," Naomi said softly. "If you want to." Franklin sat down on the ground, his back against the trunk of a cottonwood tree. After a moment, Naomi joined him, maintaining a respectful distance. "Margaret was the daughter of a merchant in San Antonio," he began, the words coming slowly at first. "We met when I was there buying supplies for the ranch. She was beautiful, yes, but it was her laugh that got me. She laughed with her whole body, like joy was something she could not contain." He smiled at the memory. "Her father thought I was too rough, too uncivilized. He wanted her to marry a banker or a lawyer, but Margaret had a stubborn streak. She chose me, chose this life." "Did she regret it?" Naomi asked. "I do not think so. She loved the ranch, loved the wide open spaces and the sky that goes on forever. We had 5 good years together. We were trying for children, hoping that would come in time, and then she got sick." His voice roughened. "Consumption is a cruel disease." It took her slowly, day by day, until there was nothing left but shadows and labored breathing. I would have traded places with her in a heartbeat. "I am so sorry," Naomi whispered. "That kind of love is rare." Franklin looked at her. "What about you? What brought you to Springerville with nothing but the clothes on your back?" Naomi was quiet for a long moment, her fingers plucking at the grass. "I was engaged to be married back in Missouri. His name was Thomas, and I thought I loved him. I thought he loved me. 2 weeks before our wedding, I discovered he had another woman, a woman he had been keeping company with for over a year. When I confronted him, he told me he was only marrying me for my father's business connections. What happened to your family?" "My parents died of cholera when I was 19. I had been living with my aunt and uncle, working in their dry goods store. After Thomas betrayed me, I could not stand the pity in everyone's eyes, the whispers. So I took what little money I had saved and headed west. I thought I might find work as a teacher or a seamstress. Instead, I ended up here, washing other people's clothes and mending their tears." There was no self-pity in her voice, just acceptance of hard facts. Franklin found himself respecting that. "Can you ride a horse?" he asked suddenly. Naomi blinked at the change of subject. "I learned as a girl, though I have not ridden in years." "Why?" "I need help at the ranch. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, is getting too old to handle all the work. She has been asking me to hire someone to help with the cooking and cleaning, but I have been putting it off. The position comes with room and board and fair wages. Better than what you are making at the boarding house, I would wager." Naomi stared at him. "You are offering me a job?" "If you want it. The work is hard and the ranch is isolated. You would be living under my roof, which might not look proper to some people, but Mrs. Chen is there as a chaperone. You would have your own room, 3 meals a day and Sundays off. Why would you do this for me?" Franklin stood up, brushing dirt from his pants. "Because you showed kindness to my wife's memory when you had no reason to. Because I think you deserve better than wearing yourself down to nothing for pennies. And because, if I am being honest, it would be good to have another person around who understands what it means to lose someone." Naomi rose to her feet, and he saw tears glistening in her eyes. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I would very much like to accept your offer." They shook hands, and Franklin felt the calluses on her palm, evidence of hard work and harder times. He had made the offer on impulse, but now that the words were spoken, he realized it felt right. The ranch had been too quiet for too long. 3 days later, Naomi arrived at the Garrett ranch with all her worldly possessions in a single worn carpetbag. Franklin met her at the main house, a sprawling adobe structure with a red tile roof and a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. The house had been built by Mexican settlers decades earlier, then abandoned. Franklin had bought the property and the surrounding land 8 years ago, seeing the potential in the good water and grazing. Mrs. Chen was waiting in the doorway, a small Chinese woman of indeterminate age with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. She had come west with her husband during the gold rush years, and when he died in a mining accident, she had found work as a housekeeper. Franklin had hired her 6 years ago, and she had become the closest thing to family he had left. "So you are the girl who tends graves," Mrs. Chen said, looking Naomi up and down with an assessing gaze. "Yes, madam," Naomi replied, meeting her eyes steadily. "Can you cook?" "Yes, madam. My mother taught me before she passed." "Can you mend?" "Yes, madam. I have been doing mending for the boarding house." "Can you follow instructions without chattering like a magpie?" Naomi's lips quirked. "I can certainly try, madam." Mrs. Chen gave a bark of laughter. "I like her. She has spine. Come, girl, I will show you your room and the kitchen. Franklin, stop hovering and go tend your cattle. Franklin found himself dismissed from his own house. He caught Naomi's eye and saw amusement there, a shared moment of understanding. Then she followed Mrs. Chen inside, and he was left standing on the porch, wondering what he had set in motion. The days developed a new rhythm. Franklin rose before dawn to work with his ranch hands, checking on the herds, mending fences, breaking horses. He had 12 men working for him, a mix of Texans, Mexicans, and one former Buffalo soldier named Silas who was the best tracker Franklin had ever met. The work was endless but satisfying, the kind of labor that left him too tired to think at night. Naomi integrated into the household seamlessly. She worked alongside Mrs. Chen, learning the older woman's ways, taking on more and more of the cooking and cleaning. She proved to be an excellent cook, better than Mrs. Chen, though no one dared say so out loud. Her biscuits were light and fluffy, her stews rich and hearty. Franklin found himself looking forward to meals in a way he had not in years. On Sundays, they rode out to the cemetery together. It became their unspoken tradition, tending Margaret's grave while talking about the week, about nothing and everything. Franklin told her about his childhood in Tennessee, about coming west as a young man with dreams of building something of his own. Naomi shared stories about her parents, about growing up in Missouri, about the books she loved to read. Summer turned to autumn, the brutal Texas heat giving way to cooler days and cold nights. Franklin found himself watching Naomi more than he should, noticing the way she laughed with Mrs. Chen, the way she sang softly while kneading bread, the way her face lit up when she saw him ride in at the end of the day. He tried to fight it. Margaret had only been gone 3 years. It felt like a betrayal to feel anything for another woman. But Naomi was not Margaret, and that was somehow the point. She was her own person, strong and kind and unafraid to speak her mind. She made him want to be more than the shell of a man he had become. One evening in late October, Franklin came back to the ranch house to find Naomi on the porch, wrapped in a shawl against the chill. She was reading by lamplight, her face peaceful in concentration. "Good book?" he asked, climbing down from his horse. She looked up with a smile. "Jane Eyre. I have read it 3 times now, but it never gets old." "What is it about?" "A governess who falls in love with her employer, a brooding man with secrets." She gave him a teasing look. "You would probably hate it." "Probably," he agreed, grinning. "I am not much for reading unless it is about cattle breeding or market prices." "That is terribly tragic. Books are windows into other worlds." Franklin sat down on the porch step, suddenly not wanting the conversation to end. "Read me some." Naomi's eyebrows rose. "Really? Really? I want to know what makes you read the same book 3 times." So she read to him, her voice soft and expressive, bringing the words to life. Franklin listened, watching her face more than he heard the story, seeing the passion and joy she took in the telling. When she finally closed the book, the stars were bright overhead and the night was full of cricket song. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For being here. For making this house feel like a home again." Naomi set the book aside, her expression serious. "Franklin, I need to tell you something," his heart hammered. "All right. I think I am falling in love with you." The words came out in a rush, like she had been holding them back for too long. "I know it is too soon. I know you still love Margaret. I know I am just the housekeeper. But I needed you to know. I cannot keep pretending I do not feel it." Franklin stood up, his mind reeling. He looked at this woman who had come into his life like an unexpected blessing, who had shown him that his heart was not as dead as he thought. "Margaret will always be part of me," he said slowly. "I loved her with everything I had. But she is gone, Naomi. She has been gone for 3 years, and I have been gone with her, just a ghost going through the motions. You made me remember what it feels like to be alive." He stepped closer, and she rose to meet him. "I am falling in love with you too," he said. "I have been fighting it because I felt guilty, like I was dishonoring Margaret's memory. But tonight, out there checking the herd, I realized something. Margaret would not want me to spend the rest of my life alone. She would want me to find happiness again, and I think I have found it with you." "Are you certain?" Naomi whispered. "I could not bear it if you changed your mind tomorrow." Franklin reached out and took her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin against his. "I am certain. I have been alone for so long, Naomi. I do not want to be alone anymore." She stepped into his arms and he held her, feeling her heart beat against his chest. They stood like that for a long time, just holding each other under the stars, two wounded souls finding comfort and hope in each other's embrace. Their first kiss came a week later, on another Sunday at Margaret's grave. They had finished tending it, and Naomi had brought chrysanthemums, the last flowers of the season. Franklin looked at the grave, at his wife's name carved in stone, and he felt Margaret's presence like a gentle touch. "I think she approves," Naomi said softly, following his gaze. "Why do you say that?" "Because you are smiling again. Because there is light in your eyes instead of shadows. She must have loved you very much, Franklin. She would want this for you." Franklin turned to Naomi and cupped her face in his hands. "I love you," he said, and kissed her. It was different from kissing Margaret, but no less powerful. Naomi kissed him back with tenderness and passion, her arms wrapping around his neck. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "I love you too," she said. "I think I have from the moment you found me here, when you could have been angry but chose kindness instead." They rode back to the ranch hand in hand, and when they arrived, Franklin announced to Mrs. Chen that he intended to marry Naomi Harper. Mrs. Chen looked between them, her wrinkled face breaking into a rare smile. "About time," she said. "I was wondering how long it would take you to pull your head out of the dirt. When is the wedding? Spring?" Franklin looked at Naomi. "If that suits you." "Spring sounds perfect," she agreed. But fate had other plans. A week later, a letter arrived from San Antonio. Margaret's father was dying, and he wanted to see Franklin before the end. It was dated 3 weeks earlier, forwarded from the town post office. Franklin stared at the paper, feeling old guilt rise up. He had not spoken to Margaret's parents since the funeral. They had blamed him for her death, saying the harsh ranch life had weakened her, made her susceptible to disease. The words had been spoken in grief, but they had cut deep. "You have to go," Naomi said when he showed her the letter. "I know, but I do not want to leave you. I will be here when you get back. Go, Franklin, make your peace." So Franklin rode to San Antonio, a journey that took 4 days of hard travel. He arrived to find Margaret's mother, Constance, standing vigil at her husband's bedside. Robert Harper was a shadow of the robust man Franklin remembered, wasted by cancer and time. "I did not think you would come," Constance said coldly when Franklin appeared in the doorway. "Your letter said he was asking for me. He has been delirious, calling for Margaret. I thought perhaps seeing you might bring him some peace." Franklin approached the bed. Robert's eyes flickered open, cloudy with pain and laudanum. "Franklin, is that you, boy?" "Yes, sir, I am here." "Margaret, where is my Margaret?" The words were a knife to the heart. "She is gone, sir. She passed 3 years ago. Do you remember?" Robert's face crumpled. "I remember. God help me, I remember. I said terrible things to you at the funeral. Terrible, unforgivable things. You were grieving, I understood." "No, you do not understand." Robert grabbed Franklin's hand with surprising strength. "I blamed you because I could not bear to blame God. But the truth is, Margaret was sickly even as a child. The doctors said she would not live to see 20. But she fought. My girl fought so hard. She lived because she was happy, because she loved you and that ranch of yours. You gave her 5 more years than anyone thought possible. 5 years of joy. Tears streamed down the old man's face. I am sorry, son. I am so sorry for the pain I caused you. Can you forgive me? Franklin felt his own tears falling. There is nothing to forgive. I loved her too. I would have done anything to save her. I know. That is why I need to tell you this. Margaret knew she was dying toward the end. She made me promise not to tell you, said you would only torture yourself trying to find a cure that did not exist. But she said something else too. She said if you found love again after she was gone, I was to give you her blessing. She wanted you to be happy, Franklin. She wanted you to have a full life. The words broke something open inside Franklin, a dam of guilt and grief that had been holding back the flood. He wept there at Robert's bedside, wept for Margaret, and for lost time, and for the absolution he had not known he needed. Robert died 2 days later, peacefully in his sleep. Franklin stayed for the funeral, made peace with Constance, and helped settle the estate. When he finally rode back to Springerville 3 weeks after he had left, he felt lighter than he had in years. Naomi was waiting on the porch when he arrived, and she flew down the steps into his arms. He held her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling grateful for this second chance at happiness. "Marry me," he said. "Not in spring, now, as soon as we can arrange it. Are you certain?" "I have never been more certain of anything. I love you, Naomi Harper. I want you to be my wife, to build a life together, to fill this house with love and laughter and maybe, if we are blessed, children. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Springerville, with Mrs. Chen and the ranch hands as witnesses. Naomi wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew, and Franklin wore his best suit, the one he had not touched since Margaret's funeral. The ceremony was short and sweet, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Franklin kissed Naomi with all the love and hope in his heart. The wedding night was tender and awkward and beautiful. They were both nervous, both aware of the ghosts that haunted them. But they came together with honesty and love, learning each other's bodies and hearts, creating something new from the broken pieces of their pasts. Winter came to the ranch, bringing cold winds and occasional snow. Franklin taught Naomi to ride properly, and she proved to be a natural horsewoman. They rode out together to check on the herds, Naomi bundled in one of his old coats, her cheeks pink from the cold. On Sundays, they still visited Margaret's grave, but now Franklin brought flowers for both Margaret and for Naomi's parents, whose graves were far away in Missouri. It felt right, honoring all those they had loved and lost. Christmas brought a surprise. Mrs. Chen announced she was retiring, planning to go live with her daughter in San Francisco. Franklin and Naomi begged her to stay, but she was adamant. "You do not need an old woman underfoot now that you are married," she said. "Besides, I want to meet my grandchildren before I am too old to remember them." She left in January, and the house felt emptier without her. But it also felt more intimate, just Franklin and Naomi building their life together. Naomi proved more than capable of running the household, and Franklin found himself consulting her on ranch decisions, valuing her perspective. Spring brought new life to the ranch. The cattle calved, the wildflowers bloomed, and Naomi discovered she was pregnant. She told Franklin one evening in April as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I am going to have a baby," she said quietly. "Our baby." Franklin felt joy explode through him like fireworks. He pulled her into his arms, laughing and whooping until she was laughing too. "When?" he asked. "October, I think, maybe November." He placed his hand on her still, flat belly, awed by the life growing there. "I am going to be a father. You are going to be a wonderful father." The pregnancy was not easy. Naomi suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, barely able to keep food down. Franklin hovered anxiously, remembering Margaret's illness, terrified of losing someone else he loved. But Naomi was strong, stronger than she looked, and gradually the sickness passed. Summer heat descended, and Naomi grew round and beautiful. Franklin caught her one day singing to her belly, her hands cradling the swell, and he fell in love with her all over again. They argued over names. Franklin wanted to name a boy after his father, while Naomi wanted to honor her own father. They compromised, deciding that if it was a boy, they would use both names, and if it was a girl, they would choose something new entirely. The baby came early on a crisp October morning. Franklin rode hard to fetch the doctor from Springerville, while the wives of his ranch hands attended Naomi. The labor was long and difficult, and Franklin wore a path in the porch boards with his pacing. Finally, as the sun was setting, he heard a baby's cry. The doctor emerged, smiling. "You have a son, Franklin, a healthy, strong boy, and your wife is asking for you." Franklin rushed inside to find Naomi propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. He approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe. "Meet your son," Naomi said softly. "Meet Samuel Charles Garrett." Franklin looked down at the tiny red face, the miniature fingers curled into fists, and felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. "He is perfect. He has your nose," Naomi said with a tired laugh. "Poor boy." Franklin sat carefully on the edge of the bed and put his arm around his wife, marveling at the family they had created. "Thank you, Naomi. Thank you for giving me this, for giving me hope and love, and now this beautiful child." "Thank you for finding me at that grave," she replied. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible to the rest of the world." They sat together like that, the three of them, as the stars came out and the night wrapped around them like a blanket. Franklin thought about the long journey that had brought him here, the grief and loss and loneliness. He thought about Margaret and knew somehow that she was at peace, glad that he had found happiness again. Samuel was a colicky baby, prone to crying through the night. Franklin walked the floors with him, singing old Tennessee songs, while Naomi tried to catch a few hours of sleep. They were both exhausted, both overwhelmed, but they were also happier than either had imagined possible. The ranch thrived under their care. Franklin hired more hands as the herds grew, and Naomi proved to have a good head for business, keeping detailed records and finding new markets for their cattle. They became partners in every sense of the word, building something larger than either could have managed alone. When Samuel was 6 months old, they received a letter from Mrs. Chen in San Francisco. She was well, she wrote, enjoying her grandchildren but missing the wide Texas sky. She enclosed a silver rattle for Samuel and her best wishes for their family. Franklin read the letter aloud to Naomi as they sat on the porch, Samuel sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms. "She says she knew from the first day you arrived that you were exactly what I needed," he said. "She says she could see the future in your eyes. Mrs. Chen always was perceptive," Naomi replied with a smile. Samuel grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's dark hair and his mother's gray eyes. He loved the horses and the cattle, fearless in a way that terrified his mother and made his father laugh. Franklin taught him to ride before he could walk properly, setting him on the gentlest mare while leading her around the corral. When Samuel was 2, Naomi became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and their daughter was born on a warm spring evening, arriving so quickly there was barely time to fetch the doctor. They named her Margaret Rose, honoring Franklin's first wife and the new beginning she represented. Maggie, as they called her, was the opposite of her brother, calm and observant where he was wild and reckless. She had Naomi's auburn hair and Franklin's stubborn chin. She became the apple of her father's eye, though he loved both his children fiercely. The years passed in a blur of joy and hard work, of droughts survived and cattle drives completed, of birthday parties and Christmas celebrations. Franklin and Naomi grew older together, their love deepening with time and shared experience. When Samuel was 10 and Maggie was 8, Naomi suggested they needed to do something about their education. Springerville had built a small schoolhouse, but it was 3 miles away, too far for the children to walk daily. "What if we built our own school?" Franklin suggested. "Right here on the ranch. We could hire a teacher, invite the children of the ranch hands, give them all a proper education." So they did, building a small schoolhouse near the main house and hiring a young teacher from Dallas. Miss Emily Santos proved to be excellent, and soon the little school had 15 students, children of the ranch workers learning to read and write and cipher. Franklin watched his children grow and learn, and he felt pride swell in his chest. Samuel showed an aptitude for ranching, already able to rope a calf and track a stray. Maggie loved books like her mother, reading everything she could get her hands on. On Sundays, the family rode out to the cemetery together. The children placed flowers on Margaret's grave, and on the small markers Franklin had placed for Naomi's parents and for his own, who had died back in Tennessee. It was important to them that their children understood the past, the losses that had shaped their parents. "Why do we visit graves for people we never met?" Samuel asked one Sunday when he was 12. Franklin looked at Naomi, then back at his son. "Because remembering the past helps us appreciate the present, because these people made us who we are, even if they are not here anymore. Your mama found me here at this grave, and that changed both our lives." "Tell us the story again," Maggie begged. She never tired of hearing how her parents met. So Naomi told it once more, how she had been tending a stranger's grave out of loneliness and hope, how Franklin had found her there and offered her a job, how they had fallen in love slowly and surely. The children listened with rapt attention, even though they had heard it dozens of times. When Naomi finished, Samuel said thoughtfully, "So Mama Margaret helped bring you together?" "In a way, yes," Franklin agreed. "Her memory reminded me that I was capable of love, that my heart was not as broken as I thought." They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. Franklin looked at his family, at his beautiful wife and his strong children, and felt gratitude wash over him. He had been given a second chance at happiness, and he had not wasted it. That night, after the children were asleep, Franklin and Naomi sat on the porch as they had done countless times over the years. The stars were brilliant overhead, the night air sweet with the scent of blooming jasmine. "You ever regret it?" Franklin asked. "Tending that grave, taking a job with a grieving widower, building a life out here in the middle of nowhere." Naomi took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "Not for one single moment. Finding you was like finding the missing piece of myself. This life, this family, this love, it is everything I ever wanted and more than I dared to dream." "I feel the same," Franklin said softly. "You saved me, Naomi. You brought me back to life." "We saved each other," she corrected. "That is what love does." They sat together in the peaceful darkness. Two souls who had found each other in the most unexpected way, who had built something beautiful from grief and loss. Their love had started at a grave, but it had grown into something vibrant and alive, a testament to the power of kindness and second chances. Inside the house, their children slept safely, dreaming whatever dreams children dream. Around them, the ranch stretched out into the night, hundreds of acres of land they had worked and loved and made their own. In the cemetery 3 miles away, Margaret's grave stood tended and honored, flowers fresh in the jar, a symbol of the past that had led to this present. Franklin pulled Naomi closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder. They did not need words anymore, not after all these years together. They simply existed in the moment, grateful for every day, every breath, every heartbeat. The years continued to roll by like the seasons, each one bringing new challenges and joys. Samuel grew into a young man, tall and capable, taking on more responsibility at the ranch. He had his father's way with horses and his mother's business sense, a combination that served him well. When he was 21, he fell in love with the new teacher at their little school, a spirited young woman named Clara from Kentucky. Franklin and Naomi gave their blessing, and the wedding was held at the ranch, a joyous celebration that lasted 2 days. Maggie proved to be more interested in medicine than ranching. She had helped deliver a calf when she was 14 and discovered a passion for healing. Franklin arranged for her to apprentice with the doctor in Springerville, and she spent her teenage years learning everything she could. When she was 19, she announced her intention to attend medical school in Philadelphia, one of the few schools that accepted women students. It will be dangerous, Franklin worried. A young woman alone in the big city. Papa, I can handle myself, Maggie assured him. You and Mama raised me to be strong. Naomi supported their daughter's dream, even though it meant she would be far away. We cannot clip her wings just because we are afraid to see her fly, she told Franklin. So Maggie went east to pursue her education, writing long letters home about her studies and the exciting, terrifying world beyond Texas. Franklin missed her terribly, but took pride in her accomplishments. As Franklin and Naomi entered their 50s, they began to slow down, letting Samuel take over more of the ranch operations. They sold off some of the land, keeping enough for comfort but not so much that it was a burden. The little school had grown into a proper schoolhouse with 2 teachers, serving not just the ranch families but children from surrounding properties. One Sunday in their 25th year of marriage, Franklin and Naomi rode out to the cemetery as they always did. The ride was slower now, their bodies not as limber as they once were, but the ritual remained important. Margaret's grave was surrounded by others now. Franklin's parents, whose bodies they had brought from Tennessee to rest here. Naomi's aunt and uncle, who had moved to Texas in their final years to be near their niece. Several of the ranch hands who had become family over the decades. We should probably start thinking about our own plots, Naomi said, though there was no sadness in her voice, just practicality. Not for a long while yet, Franklin replied. I plan to keep you around until we are both too ornery to die. She laughed, the same full-bodied laugh that still made his heart skip. Is that so? Absolutely. We have grandchildren to spoil and great-grandchildren to meet. Death will just have to wait its turn. They had 3 grandchildren so far. Samuel and Clara had 2 boys, both hellions who loved their grandfather's stories. Maggie, who had returned from medical school and set up a practice in Springerville, had married a fellow doctor and they had a daughter. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Franklin looked at the woman beside him. Her auburn hair was streaked with silver now, her face lined with the years, but she was still beautiful to him, still the woman who had tended a stranger's grave and changed his life. I love you, he said, the words as true now as the first time he had spoken them. I love you too, she replied. Always and forever. They rode home in the gathering dark, their hands clasped between their horses, two people who had found each other in grief and built a legacy of love. The ranch house glowed with lamplight in the distance, and Franklin could see Samuel moving around in the barn, tending the evening chores. Smoke rose from the chimney, promising warmth and supper and comfort. This was home. This was family. This was the life they had built together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of love at a time. When they reached the house, Samuel came out to help them down from their horses. He had his father's height and his mother's eyes, and Franklin felt a surge of pride at the man his son had become. "Clara is making your favorite for supper, Ma," Samuel said. "Her famous chicken and dumplings." "Wonderful," Naomi replied. "I am starving." They went inside to find the house full of family. Clara was in the kitchen with their two boys helping, flour dusting everyone's faces. The table was already set, places for all of them, a bounty of food ready to be shared. This was what they had built. Not just a ranch or a business, but a family rooted in love and respect and hard work. Franklin looked around the table at the faces of the people he loved most in the world, and he felt complete. After supper, as Clara put the boys to bed and Samuel went out for a final check of the barns, Franklin and Naomi found themselves alone on the porch again. It was their favorite place, the spot where they had shared so many important moments. "You remember that first night I read to you?" Naomi asked. "You looked so uncomfortable, like you had never heard a story before." "I had not really. Margaret used to read sometimes, but I was always too busy with the ranch to pay much attention. I regret that now." "You have made up for it. You read to the grandchildren all the time." "That is different. With them, I want to soak up every moment. I have learned not to take time for granted." They rocked in companionable silence, the kind of quiet that only comes from decades of partnership. A coyote howled in the distance, and the horses nickered softly in the barn. These were the sounds of home, familiar and comforting. "I have been thinking," Franklin said slowly, "about the cemetery, about what you said earlier, about our plots. Yes, I want to be buried next to you, of course, but I also want to be near Margaret. She started all this in a way. Without her grave, we never would have met." Naomi was quiet for a moment. "I think that is beautiful, Franklin. We could all rest together, the three of us. She would like that." "You really think so?" "I know so. Love does not diminish when it is shared. There is room enough in the heart for everyone we have loved, living and dead." They made the arrangements the following week, choosing a spot beneath the cottonwood trees near Margaret's grave. The stonecutter in Springerville took their order for matching headstones, to be placed when the time came. "Morbid business," the stonecutter said cheerfully, "but practical. More folks should plan ahead." Life continued its steady rhythm. Maggie's medical practice thrived, and she often rode out to the ranch to check on her aging parents. She was stern with them about taking care of themselves, making them promise to call her if anything felt wrong. "I am a doctor, not a miracle worker," she said. "But I would like to keep you around as long as possible." "We will do our best," Franklin promised. Samuel expanded the ranch's operations, adding sheep to the cattle, diversifying their income. He consulted with Franklin on every major decision, valuing his father's experience while bringing new ideas to the table. It was the perfect partnership between old and new. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Franklin and Naomi renewed their vows in the same little church where they had first married. Their children and grandchildren surrounded them, along with friends from across the county. It was a joyous celebration, a testament to lasting love. As Franklin slipped a new ring on Naomi's finger, he looked into her eyes and saw his whole world reflected there. 30 years, he said softly. 30 years since I found you at that grave. Best decision I ever made, asking you to stay." Best decision I ever made, saying yes, Naomi replied. They danced at the reception, slow and careful now, their bodies not as spry as they once were. But the love was just as strong, burning steady and sure. That night, lying in bed together, Franklin pulled Naomi close. I was thinking about what I would say if I could go back and talk to my younger self, the man I was before you. What would you say? That grief is not the end, that there is life after loss, love after heartbreak, that the heart is more resilient than we know, capable of healing and growing and loving again. I would tell him to hold on, because something wonderful is coming. Naomi kissed him softly. I would tell my younger self the same thing. That the girl washing clothes at the boarding house, that girl who felt invisible and forgotten, she is going to find a home. She is going to find love. She is going to find purpose. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, the way they had for 30 years, the way they would for however many years they had left. The seasons turned. Summer heat gave way to autumn cool, autumn to winter cold, winter to spring renewal. Franklin and Naomi grew older, their steps slower, their bodies more fragile. But their love remained constant, the bedrock on which everything else was built. When Franklin was 68, he had a scare with his heart. Maggie rushed to the ranch, her medical bag in hand, and insisted he rest. For weeks, Naomi barely left his side, reading to him, bringing him meals in bed, holding his hand through the long nights. "You are not allowed to leave me," she said fiercely one night when he was particularly weak. "We made a deal, remember, too ornery to die." Franklin managed a smile. "I remember. I am not going anywhere, Naomi. I have too much to live for." He recovered, though Maggie made him promise to take things easier. Samuel took over all the physical work of the ranch, and Franklin contented himself with overseeing operations from the porch, offering advice when asked. On Sundays, they still rode out to the cemetery, though now they went in a wagon rather than on horseback. The routine remained important, a thread connecting past to present. Naomi added flowers to more and more graves over the years. Friends, neighbors, people they had known and loved. The cemetery grew, a testament to lives lived and remembered. "We have buried a lot of people," Franklin observed one Sunday. "We have loved a lot of people," Naomi corrected. "That is the price of a long life. We outlive some of those we care about. But we keep their memories alive, just like we keep Margaret's memory alive." Franklin looked at his first wife's grave, well tended after all these years. "I still talk to her sometimes. Is that strange? Not at all. I talk to my parents, to Mrs. Chen. The dead are not as far away as we think." They returned home to find a letter waiting from Philadelphia. It was from a publishing house, addressed to Naomi. Inside was an offer to publish a collection of her writings, essays about life in the West that she had been writing for years and submitting to various magazines. "They want to publish my book," Naomi said, stunned. "They actually want to publish it." Franklin swept her into his arms, laughing. "Of course they do. You are a wonderful writer. I am so proud of you." At 65, Naomi became a published author. Her book, Tending Graves and Growing Love, A Western Life, was a modest success, finding readers who appreciated her honest, heartfelt account of frontier living. She gave readings in Springerville and in San Antonio, and Franklin sat in the front row at every event, beaming with pride. "Never too old for new adventures," Naomi said after her first reading. "Never too old for anything as long as we are together," Franklin agreed. Their 70th and 71st years brought more grandchildren and the first great-grandchildren. The ranch house was constantly full of noise and laughter, children running through the rooms, babies crying, young mothers calling for their wandering toddlers. Franklin and Naomi loved every chaotic minute of it. One evening, after a particularly boisterous family gathering, they sat on the porch watching the sun set. Franklin's hand was clasped in Naomi's, their fingers intertwined as they had been for over 40 years now. "We did all right, did we not?" Franklin asked. "We did better than all right," Naomi replied. "We built a legacy of love. Our children are good people, our grandchildren are thriving, our great-grandchildren will carry our values into the future. What more could we ask for? Nothing. Absolutely nothing." They sat in peaceful silence as the stars emerged, one by one, in the darkening sky. The ranch was quiet now, everyone gone home or tucked into bed. It was just the two of them, the way it had been so many evenings over so many years. Franklin thought about the long journey of his life, the joys and sorrows, the losses and gains. He thought about Margaret, gone now for over 40 years but never forgotten. He thought about the man he had been, hollow and grieving, convinced his life was over at 32. And he thought about the woman who had saved him, who had shown him that endings could become beginnings, that loss could transform into love. Naomi had come into his life tending a grave, and she had taught him how to live again. "Thank you," he said quietly. Naomi turned to look at him, her face soft in the lamplight. "For what, my love? For everything. For tending that grave. For accepting my job offer. For loving me even when I was difficult. For giving me children and grandchildren and a life more beautiful than I deserved. For every single day of the past 40 years. Tears glistened in Naomi's eyes. "You gave me just as much, Franklin. You saw me when I was invisible. You offered me not just a job but a home, a purpose, a family. You loved me with your whole heart. I am the one who should be thanking you." "Then let us call it even," Franklin said, pulling her close. "Two broken people who found each other and became whole." They kissed, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 4 decades of love and commitment. When they finally pulled apart, both were crying, but they were happy tears, tears of gratitude and joy. The years rolled on, gentle and kind. Franklin and Naomi grew very old, their bodies frail but their minds sharp. They spent their days on the porch, reading and talking and watching their descendants come and go. They were the heart of the family, the foundation on which everything was built. On a warm Sunday in May, when Franklin was 78 and Naomi was 76, they made their weekly trip to the cemetery. Samuel drove the wagon, going slowly over the rutted road. The family had tried to convince them to stop making the journey, but they had refused. "We have tended these graves for over 50 years, Franklin had said firmly. "We are not stopping now." They arrived at the cemetery to find the wildflowers in bloom, carpeting the hillside in yellow and purple and white. Franklin helped Naomi down from the wagon and they walked slowly to Margaret's grave, their steps careful but determined. The grave looked beautiful, surrounded by flowers and shaded by the ancient cottonwood trees. Franklin stood before it, his hand in Naomi's, and he felt peace wash over him. "Hello, old friend," he said softly to Margaret's headstone. "Thank you for bringing us together. Thank you for your blessing. I hope you know how happy I have been." Naomi placed fresh flowers in the jar, her movements practiced and loving. "We will all rest here together someday," she said. "The 3 of us, plus all the others we have loved. It is a good place, full of peace and beauty." They stood there for a long time, soaking in the quiet, feeling the weight of years and memories. The sun was warm on their faces, and a gentle breeze rustled through the cottonwood leaves. "I am tired," Franklin admitted finally. "These old bones do not want to move much anymore." "I know," Naomi said. "I am tired too, but it is a good tired, the kind that comes from a life well lived." They made their way back to the wagon and Samuel helped them up. As they rode back to the ranch, Franklin looked at the land rolling by, the land he had worked and loved for over 50 years. He looked at his son, strong and capable, carrying on the legacy. He looked at his wife, still beautiful despite the years, still the love of his life. That night, Franklin and Naomi went to bed early, exhausted from the trip. They lay together in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. "I love you," Franklin whispered. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Naomi replied, "in this life and whatever comes after." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms the way they had for over 40 years. And in the morning, when the sun rose over the Texas plains, they were still together, still holding on, still loving each other with every fiber of their being. The days and weeks and months continued to pass, each one precious, each one a gift. Franklin and Naomi knew they were living on borrowed time, but they did not waste a single moment. They cherished every sunrise, every meal with family, every quiet evening on the porch. When Franklin was 81, his health began to fail more seriously. Maggie moved back to the ranch to care for her parents full-time, bringing her husband and daughter with her. The house was full again, multiple generations under one roof, just as it had been in the best times. Naomi rarely left Franklin's side. She read to him, sang to him, held his hand through the pain. The roles had reversed from his heart scare years earlier, and now it was his turn to rely on her strength. "I am ready," Franklin told her one night when the pain was particularly bad. "I am not afraid to go." "I know," Naomi said, tears streaming down her face, "but I am not ready to let you go. You will be all right. You are the strongest person I know. Only because you made me strong. You believed in me when no one else did." Franklin cupped her face in his weathered hand. "Promise me something." "Anything. Promise me you will keep living, keep writing, keep loving, keep tending those graves. Do not bury yourself with me." "I promise," Naomi whispered, "but you have to promise me something too." "What is that?" "Promise me we will find each other again, somewhere beyond this life." "Promise me this is not the end." "I promise," Franklin said. "I will find you, Naomi, in this life or the next or whatever comes after. My soul knows yours, and it always will." They held each other through the night, and in the morning, Franklin Garrett passed away peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by the family he loved, held in the arms of the woman who had saved him. The funeral was the largest Springerville had ever seen. People came from across Texas to pay their respects to a man who had been fair and generous, who had built something lasting, who had loved deeply and well. They buried him in the cemetery beneath the cottonwood trees, in the plot he had chosen years earlier, right next to Margaret's grave with space reserved for Naomi on his other side. Naomi stood at the graveside, her children and grandchildren surrounding her, and she did not cry. She had shed all her tears in private. Now she stood straight and strong, honoring the promise she had made to keep living. After the funeral, after everyone had gone home, Naomi returned to the cemetery alone. She stood between the two graves, Franklin's fresh, turned earth on one side, Margaret's weathered stone on the other. "Take care of him," she said to Margaret. "He loved you so much, and he never forgot you. But he loved me too, and I think there is room enough in eternity for all of us." She placed flowers on both graves, then walked slowly back to the ranch. The house felt empty without Franklin, but it was still full of life. Samuel and his family were there, Maggie and hers. She was not alone, would never be alone. Naomi kept her promise. She continued writing, publishing 2 more books about frontier life. She tended the graves every Sunday, adding Franklin's to her rounds. She loved her expanding family, meeting more great-grandchildren and eventually great-great-grandchildren. She lived to be 93 years old, sharp and engaged until the very end, When Naomi Harper Garrett finally passed away on a spring morning much like the one when she had first found Franklin at Margaret's grave, she was ready. Her last words were, "I am coming, my love. Wait for me." They buried her between Franklin and Margaret, just as they had planned. The three headstones stood together beneath the cottonwood trees, a testament to love in all its forms. The years turned into decades, and the ranch continued under Samuel's stewardship, and then his children's and grandchildren's. The Garrett name became synonymous with integrity and community service. The little school they had built grew into a proper academy. The cemetery they had tended became a protected historical site. And every Sunday, someone from the family still rode out to tend the graves, maintaining a tradition started over a century earlier by a lonely woman and a grieving widower who had found each other in the most unexpected way. They told their children the story, and their children told their children, passing down the legacy of love that had started with a simple act of kindness. The graves were never without fresh flowers. The stones were always clean and readable. And if you visited on a quiet evening when the wind rustled through the cottonwood leaves, some people swore you could feel the love that lingered there, a love that had conquered grief and death and time itself, a love that would last forever.